Here we are with Rick VUAT. VUAT? It's
VUAT?
V-U-A-T. It's a French name for a nice bloke from Melbourne who I've met here in Tasmania, but apparently with some Italian lineage. Is that correct?
That's right.
And so,
But from the north of Italy with lots of French influence.
Okay. But you're Australian.
Yeah, born here, yes.
For this life, yes.
Yeah.
Well, so now tell us, we're here in central Tasmania due to a mutual friend, and you're sort of relocating here. And would you say, have you spent a lot of time in Tasmania before? Well, first, tell us a bit about your background. Like, where did you actually grow up?
Well, my mother's from Tasmania. She's from Devonport. We don't know much about her bloodline because she was adopted, and I'd like to find out what that involved. But anyway, it's another story. My grandfather, her adopted grandfather's from Zeehan. So, you know, I've got Tasmanian links. Came down here years ago, I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago to check out a Steiner school at the time. And
that you were going to attend?
Yeah, we were starting and going to send the kids there and help sort of establish it. So.
Was that in Hobart?
No, that was in Launceston.
Okay.
And then we stayed here, and then I got lots of work here.
Doing?
Managed some very large gardens, private gardens, worked at a landscaping suppliers place in Launceston, and then ended up teaching horticulture at TAFE in Launceston for a few years.
Well, so now would you say, I know that you're a very talented artist and banjo player, but horticulture is kind of like, seems like your main gig. So how did you come to be interested in horticulture and plants, and is that your educational background?
Yeah, well, I've been playing with plants ever since I was a little kid, you know, like most little kids, I think. I love dinosaurs, and I even went from a very young age, I was making little gardens for dinosaurs, you know, with moss and ferns and things, and that was kind of the genesis, I suppose. And my father was a gardener, and...
Were you ever interested in prehistoric plants?
Not as a young age, but, you know, in later years when I was teaching botany, of course, that came up, yeah, so...
So did you study, you went to college?
No, I did trade horticulture. I had the choice of going to a horticultural college, but, you know, I was advised by most people that if I ever wanted to get some work, you're better off doing something more practical.
Yes, so, where you actually work with plants rather than books.
Well, yeah, more so. We worked with books as well, but, you know, more with plants, so... Luckily, it was a bit unusual to get this position, but I got an apprenticeship with the Royal Botanic Gardens in Melbourne. And when I say lucky, because they only take one a year. Yes. So.
And what did you do during that time?
Oh gosh, well, the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne are quite renowned in a worldly sense. They're very beautiful gardens, and it's a very good collection. So I pretty well worked everywhere in the gardens, you know, from all the collections in the nursery through the grounds collections, and also through all the workshops and the herbarium.
Well, were you working with like day-to-day maintenance and also educational, like taking people on tours and stuff like that, or?
No, they weren't really doing that back in those days. I mean, the gardens had sort of a very checkered background for a while, and it was just coming out of those sort of... well, not so good period. So they were really just starting to find their feet. So, but, you know, it was still a beautiful garden, but it had been a bit neglected over the years, and with a new director and a new direction, it started to pull out of that inertia, I guess, is
yes.
Putting it.
Well, now, may I ask you, how would you define horticulture? Would you say, is horticulture a branch of botany?
No, well, botany's a part of horticulture. Horticulture is a really diverse study, science, application, whatever you like. It goes from nurseries, retail, wholesale, to landscaping, to arboriculture, silviculture, to hydroponics, aquaponics. Gosh, I could just keep going. You know, it's different to agriculture. Agriculture is more livestock and broad scale. You know, crop growing. Horticulture's apples, pears, all the fruit trees, all the berries, all the nuts, all the vineyards. It's a really diverse study, very diverse.
And was there a particular branch of horticulture that you've been interested in, or just sort of across the full spectrum?
Well, you know, I was very interested in plants, basically. So collections, because I had the Botanic Gardens background, I was very interested in plants per se, you know, on their own. So,
Well, now let me ask you this. Who are plants?
what are plants, or who are plants?
Exactly, both. And as opposed to animals, you know, like the standard scientifically, what's the difference? They're the two major kingdoms of life.
Well, you know, they're living, breathing beings.
What distinguishes an animal from a plant?
Well, at the end of the day, probably not that much. You know, plants have a circulatory system. They breathe, they respire, they
Yes.
transpire. They do a lot of the things that animals do. They don't tend to walk around much.
Yes, well,
But-
in my mind, the biggest thing that's especially come to light in a lot of the sort of atmospheric hoopla in recent years is the sort of the symbiotic relationship between the plant and animal kingdoms, in that they have photosynthesis by means of which they create oxygen and they inhale the carbon dioxide that we exhale as mammals, and so we have
The symbiosis.
yes.
Yeah. So, like, if it wasn't for plants, we wouldn't be here. Basically, it'd be a rock. So,
Now, do
people
you
seem to forget that.
do you include in your thinking? Do you include fungi as plants? Because they're really not, are they?
Look, they're a group within the plant kingdom. Fungi. Fungi are a group on their own. They're kind of an odd little group of organisms. I won't necessarily call them plants. Algae are more plant-like in that they're green and they photosynthesize.
What about your phytoplankton and cyanobacteria and things like that?
Well,
They're kind of like microscopic plants. Some of them, aren't they?
yeah, there's some crossovers between between the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom.
Really, it's kind of a blurred boundary.
It's a
isn't
bit
it?
blurred. Yeah, it is. So I don't even know if it's really been.
Well,
it's
you know how
really-
it seems to me is that scientists, if you look at the history of taxonomy, for example, and all the different classifications, it's like they're trying to impose an order on the real world, and for every category they create, there's going to be something that's in between. You know what I'm saying? It's like the categories are our attempt to reduce the complexity of a world that's so complex. We can't really get our minds around the whole thing.
Well, you know, reductionist ideas are pretty common in modern parlance and thinking, but and you know, a lot of things are cut and dry. You know, plants are, you know, the higher plants, I suppose, because we do talk about higher plants and lower plants.
Is that vascular and non-vascular?
Vascular and non-vascular? Yeah.
What's the difference? What does the word monocotyledon and dicotyledon mean?
Oh, that's easy. So a cotyledon is a seed leaf. Okay, so if you were to get a bean and you know, open it up, you'll see there's these two fat sort of structures. So they're cotyledons. So dicotyledon is and they're two great big plant divisions or plant kingdom divisions.
Yes.
Dicotyledon are plants that have two cotyledons. Monocotyledons have one. So typically, and there's all sorts of.
But what's the cotyledon? Is it like a
The
seed?
cotyledons is an embryonic. It's a food source for the embryo.
So it's like it's the thing itself. It's not the organ that makes it.
No, you know, if you look at a bean seed, because it's quite large, you'll have an embryo, which is the embryonic tissues of the whole plant, supported by the cotyledons and protected by the cotyledons in the seed stage. And when it germinates or when it starts to grow, the cotyledons feed that embryonic plant.
Yes. So are the monocots and dicots, are they the two divisions of the vascular plants?
They're two divisions. There's angiosperms and gymnosperms. But that's another thing.
Are they the conifers?
So angiosperms are flowering plants. Gymnosperms are the gymnosperm basically means naked seed. So the flowering plants have a fruit with the seeds that contained within it. The gymnosperms, their seeds, when they're being pollinated, are naked or exposed.
So, like, and the conifers would be an example of that.
Conifers, cycads,
Banksia?
ferns.
No, Banksia is a flower.
No, Banksia is an angiosperm.
Okay.
So yeah, so angiosperms have seeds that are contained within an ovary or a fruit.
Yep.
And gymnosperms, when their seeds are being pollinated, they're naked or exposed to that pollination process.
Yes, this is very interesting. Well, beyond the fact that the oxygen that we breathe comes from the plant kingdom, and probably most of it from phytoplankton and algae in the ocean, beyond that fundamental contribution of plants to non-plant life, would you say that the next greatest one would be that plants have been food for us?
Well, plants, yeah, as I said before, without plants there'd be no herbivores, there'd be no carnivores, because the carnivores eat the herbivores and the herbivores eat the plants.
Yes. Well,
so if you're looking at the animal kingdom.
Yes, but would the plants that have provided food for us traditionally come from certain subdomains of the plant kingdom, or sort of across the full spectrum?
No, for the full spectrum. Whether it's spirulina, which is an algae,
yes,
or whether it's an apple or a banana or a peanut, it's a very broad, or herbs or grasses, the grains, the rice, the wheat, the spelt, the whatever it is, the plant world provides a very broad range of foodstuffs for every for most living things, even fungi and bacteria and microfauna.
yes.
So, like I say, no tree, no me, no plants, no nobody. And even plants are responsible for, or the lower plants, the lichens and those types of things are responsible for creating soils.
Because they have chemicals that can break down the rock, right?
Yeah. So the lichens, most people call it lichen. Okay, if you want to do that, it's correctly lichen. So lichens will colonise rocks, and mosses will colonise rock, and their carbonic acids will break down the rocks over a period of time into smaller and smaller pieces, and soils are created.
Yes. Well, let me ask you this: what are some of your very favourite plants?
Couldn't even begin to tell you. There's too many.
Because it would be stupid to say, are there any you don't like? Like like bracken, for example.
Yeah, I don't like blackberries. I don't like things that shouldn't be where they,
But what about the blackberry fruit?
Blackberry fruit's great. Well, that's probably my favourite fruit.
Really? Well, is it true that the tomato is the tomato a berry botanically?
A tomato's a berry, but a blackberry's not.
What?
And neither's a strawberry.
What are they?
Neither's a raspberry.
What are they?
Well, they're not berries.
They're similar, but they look like they're clusters of microberries.
No,
that's what each one looks like.
No,
how can a strawberry not be a berry?
A strawberry's an achein.
You're bloody joking, mate.
No, mate. A strawberry's more like a grain of wheat than a berry.
For real? Well, but I can see the structural similarity. Okay,
the fruit of a strawberry is that little crunchy bit that gets stuck in your teeth. The red bit that you eat isn't a fruit. Just like an apple's not a fruit. The only part of an apple that's a fruit is the little bit inside the fingernail bit. That's
core
the
part,
fruit.
the little center part that
the bit on the outside you eat is not part of the fruit.
What's that for? Is it to draw predators to help it spread? To get it eaten.
Well, most fruits are. Most fruits, if the vector or the agent that spreads it is something that eats it, then it'll be some sort of fleshy fruit.
Well, see, but that's so because if you want to talk about intelligence, the plant kingdom is extraordinarily intelligent, and I've even heard examples of that plants actually they make chemicals that'll repel things that might eat it or attract things like the Venus flytrap, and that they do move, but in a different time frame from us.
They're extraordinarily intelligent, but not intelligence as we understand it, but.
It's an even more ancient intelligence than animal intelligence.
I'll give you one which I particularly like. There's a little native orchid, a ground orchid in Western Australia, that has a symbiosis with a native wasp. and the orchid has produced a flower that not only looks like the female of that wasp species, but also produces pheromones to attract the male wasp to it to mate. And when the male wasp mates, it picks up pollen and takes it to another flower. Now that's clever.
Now, is it angry when there's no babies?
I don't think it really cares, but
Because it did its
pretty
job.
clever. I mean, I could go on for ages about different symbioses.
But please
that are
do.
just as,
Think of a few more
look,
examples.
Orchidaceae is the most. We call Orchidaceae the most evolved of the plants because their reproduction is so complex.
That's the orchid family.
The orchid family.
And how many of them are there? Thousands?
There's a lot.
Are they everywhere except like only in warm climates?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't think there's any in the frozen areas, but they have some amazing symbioses with insects in particular. In regard to their requirements for pollination.
Yes.
So
now tell us about what exactly is pollination.
Well, pollination is the transfer of the male genetic material to the female for the joining of the two to make a
And how many
to reproduce.
What varieties of the plant kingdom use or require pollination?
Most of the higher plants, whether it's
vascular,
higher vascular
flowering
plants,
and
flowering plants. Most of gymnosperms and angiosperms, monocots and dicots.
And so, would you say the majority of cross pollination is performed by insects?
No. Okay,
so it could be wind or just dispersion in the air.
So a vector is an agent that moves something from somewhere. So it can be wind, or it can be water, it can be animal, it can be a number of ways.
Could something be fertilized telepathically with some virtual pollen? Just kidding.
Not my union. I don't know. Never heard of that one before. Field of all possibilities, I suppose.
So now tell us about bees and honey and pollen. So now what is honey? I know it's not do you consider honey to be an animal product? Because to me, it's kind of a hybrid. It's like animal and plant. Isn't it a mixture of the pollen that the bees get, and then they've digested it? Can you explain?
I'm not sure of the process of what actually. I don't even know if science does actually know.
Because the only reason I'm asking, came to my attention because some people that were hardcore vegans said, "Oh, we're not eating honey because it's an animal product," and it seemed kind of like a marginal claim. I can see their point, but
yeah, look. It is an animal product indirectly, I suppose. I mean, it's made by bees. If it weren't for bees, you wouldn't have honey.
Exactly, but is it mostly just pollen, the honey?
Yeah, they'll just collect pollen, and whatever they do to metamorphose that into honey is whatever they do.
Do they eat it and then excrete it?
I don't.
See, that's what I wasn't sure.
I don't really know what that process.
And it may not even be that they all make it the same way.
I don't really. That's
it's interesting though, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's out of my area. But
the pollen grains that we see on the bees' feet. Now that's that's a side effect of what they're doing, right? Because they're getting the nectar. That's what I was looking for.
No, they're making. No, there are nectarivores. There are birds and there are insects that directly feed on nectar.
So the honeybee drinks the nectar.
No, honeybee takes pollen and turns it into honey. And unless you're not, and generally speaking, beekeepers or apiarists look after their bees very carefully because it's their livelihood.
Yep.
So the idea of them hurting the bees is a bit ridiculous. So I'm happy to talk to vegans about that. It's a bit like chickens and eggs, you're not actually hurting the chicken to make an egg.
No, but they might get frustrated when they see that their eggs aren't making any babies.
If you want to assign human emotions to chickens, you're more than welcome.
I won't call it a human emotion, but it's a chook emotion. I've witnessed something that I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Oh, look, a mother hen will look after her chicks for a while, and then when the novelty wears off, they go.
Yes, but at least she knows that they came into being.
Yeah, she knows. She knows she's looked after them for a while and takes care of them, and that's a natural instinct to do that.
Well, now, this is so cool talking with you. Now, let me ask you this. We were talking about this place called Findhorn, in the legendary place in Scotland. And it was interesting because just a couple of weeks ago, I was out there. It's when I was picking all the apples here and stuff, and I was messing with the soil. And I really got this feeling that I had at Findhorn of a very sort of a potent kind of a fertility earth energy that I felt. And I felt it in Tasmania before, kind of like, and I went like, well, it's a similar energy to what I actually felt at Findhorn. Well, before I actually ask you about Findhorn, I wanted to share this experience. I had just come from there. This was in 1998, and I was in Ireland. And a friend of mine was sending me some money via Western Union, and so I was in the town called Tralee, Trali, that's known for its roses. And I had to walk over to this university, to the Western Union office, and the shortest way there took me through this a grove of giant old trees. And I was kind of stressed out about a lot of stuff, and I got about halfway through this grove of trees, and I stopped dead in my tracks because I felt this energy. It was almost as if invisible, I don't know, waves of kind of almost like arms of energy embracing me and made me stop and hugged me, not physically, but like energetically, and soothed me. And it was almost as if there was these kind of grandmotherly or grandfatherly voices saying something like, Jeff, it's all going to be all right. We're the giant trees. But it stopped me in my tracks. It was so powerful, man. It's so real. And I told other people about it. I'd never felt anything like it. And I told other people, and guess what they said? They go like, Jeff, those trees are known for doing that. They can bring their aura down around you and stuff. And this was really, I had just come from Findhorn and was probably tuned in with something like that. But this was like, a long time ago. And I felt stuff like that many times, and become very close friends with trees and spend time with big trees and stuff. And have you had experiences like that?
Yeah. It's interesting that if a man's mind isn't too complicated and it can experience a lack of activity, then one can tune into the, call it consciousness of the plant. There's plenty of situations where plants have communicated with man to give them an understanding of what they are. Our relationship with the plant kingdom goes back a long way, and when you look at some of the examples of, we'll look at ayahuasca, for example.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you're describing
you'll have something like ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic, which is a teacher plant.
Yes.
Or it's a
from the Peruvian Amazon.
It's a product that is a teaching plant, like some mushrooms and some cacti.
Yes, and its primary ingredient is DMT, right, from the Banisteriopsis?
Yeah, DMT.
Other stuff they put in there.
Whatever. And but the fascinating thing is with ayahuasca is that in a forest of thousands of species of plants, only two are put together to make the potion, and they don't live anywhere near each other. So when you consider how those two plants were found, and to understand their and have an understanding of their potency, is kind of fascinating. In that
you're implying that it wasn't just random trial and error that brought people to that.
It wasn't.
They were guided to do it.
It's not trial and error. It's too complex to be trial. It's like your Venus flytrap you were talking about before. That's. I could go on about evolution and
please do for a minute.
Well, I believe in creative evolution or intelligent evolution, where there is a lot of trial and error involved. It's not just random. There's mutations involved, but it's also trial and error. Wouldn't
you say that other life forms have a different time frame than us?
Well, other life forms, more mobile life forms can evolve probably quicker than plants, because plants just stay in the one place and they're influenced by whatever environmental aspects they're living under. But animals can move. You know, if something's not right, they can go somewhere else, and you'll find natural variations, and it's a lot of trial and error. You know, they'll try something. If it doesn't work, they'll try something else. But there are those that can communicate with the plant world and understand their properties over and above the obvious, like an apple or an orange.
That it's
The
going
more
to be
subtle
whether
things.
it's safe to eat or not.
Well, the safe to eat or not can be trial and error. You know, someone eats the wrong fungi in the village and they end up dead.
Well, is it possible that there may be things that are, it might be poisonous to somebody and not poisonous to somebody else?
That's possible. It's just like some people are allergic to gluten and some people aren't. You know, it's probably the same kind of thing.
Are there any gluten addicts?
Addicts?
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, probably me.
Well, back to the communicating with the plant kingdom. How exactly does that work?
Well, you know,
Because we'll say, for example, the acacia or the DMT, the Banisteriopsis vine that the ayahuasca is made from, that has a psychoactive molecule.
Yeah.
And the psychedelics, as we know, most of them kind of resemble or mimic substances that's in our brain. Like your indoles mimic serotonin and that kind of thing. That's what makes it work. It kind of like it fulfills. It's sort of like your brain has more of the stuff, the juice that makes it run.
Yeah.
More circuits fire and stuff. So how did the plant? Well, what's the relationship? What's the chicken and the egg thing here? Did humans evolve chemicals in our brain that was similar to stuff? Because that would have existed before we did. See what I'm saying?
yeah. Okay, so when you talk about intelligence, the whole of creation's intelligent. You know, I don't know how esoteric you want me to get, but
Well, how esoteric can you get?
well,
There's no limit.
as esoteric as you'd like.
Because
You
I
know,
hope
the whole of creation is not only created by an omniscient intelligence and an omnipresent and omnipotent intelligence.
that happens to be a plant, right?
No,
I'm just kidding.
that happens to be, well, whatever you want to call it, God, whatever you want to call
A
it,
VCI,
whatever.
vast creative intelligence.
That'll do. And you know that creative intelligence is capable of anything. It's the field of all possibilities, any possibility. And so consciousness is active in the human nervous system, and it's intimately linked to a nervous system. Okay, a consciousness.
But
So the human consciousness.
may I anticipate you there for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Would you say which came first, consciousness or matter?
Well, if I say nothing matters, I will say that because all of matter comes from nothing. Okay, so nothing comes first. The creator of everything that there is formless and ageless.
Is
But
that consciousness the creator?
That's consciousness, the creator. It's the great self. And it creates. And then it creates eyes to look at what it's created. So whether it's human eyes or dog eyes or bee eyes, it likes to see what its creation looks like and how it interacts.
Well, do you know what the origin of the eye is? Check this out, and I'll ask you about plant eyes in a minute. From what I've read, the trilobite, they were these
Yeah.
arthropods that lived on the bottom of the ocean. They were nature's first use of the eye.
Yep.
It was a compound eye, like insects have.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the first kind of like. Maybe it was the first, not optical sensor, but the first thing that actually kind of created an image. The first kind of like an image replicator or something like that. So do plants have any ability to? Plants are it's called tropism, right? They're drawn to light.
Yeah, but there's geotropisms, there's phototropisms. A tropism is just a response to an external stimuli.
But it means that it's drawn to that, right?
It's drawn to it, at an energetic level. So geotropism is a relationship to the earth,
To gravity?
To gravity. Phototropism is a relationship and attraction to light or lack of light. So, but there, to put them into the realm of intelligence, they really are just responses. It's like, you put your hand against a hot stove and you pull away because it's too hot. It's just a simple response.
Yes, but if you didn't do it, people
complicated.
would say you were stupid. So it's like it's a lack of intelligence by default, right?
Well, yeah.
I mean, but I mean, it applies on many different levels, doesn't it? Intelligence. But I always thought it was funny that we humans have tended to glorify ourselves as the ones with the most of this thing that we invented to begin with, and that everybody else may or may not have like less degrees of it than us. But I really don't think that's true.
Well, I'd probably beg to differ in that I think that the one unique thing with the human nervous system is it has the ability to experience infinity. And, if there's something else out there in the universe or any universe that can do that, well, great. But
Well, how do we do that?
because we can experience our true self, which is infinite, and we do that by transcending of the mind.
But how do you really know it's infinite until you reach the edge?
Well, okay.
But that's like an oxymoron. The edge of infinity, because it's by definition boundless, right?
Well, okay, yeah. Well, let's look at it that way. So it's the experience of boundlessness, no boundaries. So if we relate that to thinking, then there's no boundaries of thinking because there's no thinking.
What about the rim of a circle? It's a loop, but it's boundless.
Yep.
So could that relate to this somehow?
You lost me on that one.
Anyway, well, let's get back to the plant kingdom.
Monocotyledons or dicotyledons are much easier.
Well, digress on those for a bit. Which do you like better? Well, give us some examples of each one.
Well,
What's a common monocot?
okay. A common monocot's grass. A common dicotyledon is an apple.
Now,
And
what
there
makes
are very different taxonomical, botanical, morphological, anatomical reasons why they're different.
Yes.
And why they're classified.
well now
as such.
isn't wheat, lawn grass, sugarcane, and bamboo? They're all and
Monocotyledons.
corn. They're all members of the grass family, right?
And they're all monocotyledons.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. And so, what are some prominent dicots that we all know and love?
Gum trees, apple trees, pear trees, jasmine, roses, elms, viburnums, daphne.
What about the little moss there?
They're in a category of their own.
Moss and lichens.
Mice and
Lichens.
lichens are a symbiosis between an algae and a fungi.
Ah, yes.
So they're different critters altogether. Mosses are different critters. They don't fall into they're bryophytes, a different category altogether.
Now, what does that mean, bryophyte?
Bryophyte, I can't remember what bryo actually means, but it's phyta means type.
Yeah.
But it's all dependent on the sophistication of their reproduction. And you've caught me on bryophyte. I'd have to upgrade on what bryo actually is.
Well, that's all right. So, but what were you going to share more about the monocots and dicotyledons?
Yeah, I mean, a monocot, they're characterised. Monocots are characterised by they only have what's called primary growth, which is elongation. They don't expand circumferentially, so therefore all their stems are fairly well parallel. If you look at a palm tree, it's like a big sausage. It doesn't taper.
It doesn't really branch.
They don't really branch. They only have one bud generally, like a palm tree. Cut the bud out, the tree dies. Whereas dicotyledons, all of their branches are tapered. So if you look at a gum tree that's 10 feet through at the base and trace that up to one single bud, you'll see that the whole way it's tapered. There's a botanical reason for that.
Which is?
That requires a whiteboard and an explanation.
Okay, we'll do that later.
I'd need to illustrate that.
All right.
And all sorts of other. They have a different vascular system. Monocotyledons don't have a vascular cambium.
No,
a vascular cambium is what dicotyledons have, which allows them to circumferentially expand in
Is this
size.
the xylem and phloem tubes?
Okay, so xylem
Is going up, right?
Generally speaking, a tree is just a big lump of plumbing. There's actually not much of a tree that's really alive.
The bark especially is the least alive, right?
The xylem is takes up the bulk of the body of let's say a gum tree,
Yeah.
right? And that's responsible for taking raw materials up into the leaves where it's processed, and under the process of photosynthesis and carbohydrates are formed that feed the plant. And then those photosynthates are then taken back down to the root system through what's called the phloem, which is just underneath the bark, which is a lot less tissue because it's very concentrated. I mean, I look at it, I always talk about a tree like a gold mine. They take in tons and tons of raw material and they process it and come out with a very small amount of pure concentrate. And plants do the same thing.
And what is it that they come up with other than the oxygen and the water that they emit? The food that they make, do they feed on sugars like we do, glucose?
No, plants are called autotrophs, which means they're self-feeders. They make their own food. We're heterotrophs. We get our energy from outside sources.
Yes.
Autotrophs make their own food. So
Yes.
they'll take in water with atomic nutrients, zinc, manganese, molybdenum, whatever it is, minerals, elements, and then it gets transported up into the foliage through the xylem, which is basically plumbing, and in the leaves, which are little factories that turn those raw materials into carbohydrates, basically, which is the food stuff for the plant. So when you say when you're fertilising a plant, you're not actually feeding it, as people say. It's feeding itself. You're just providing raw materials for the plant to create its own food.
Yes. Now, tell us what the stomata are.
Well, stomata, the word stoma comes from the Greek, which means mouth, stoma. And stomata are really interesting little things that, so if you have a typical leaf, it's not something you'll see with the naked eye, but under a typical, say, an oak leaf, there'll be thousands and thousands of little mouths that open and close.
Is it like little pores that they breathe
They're
through?
little pores that they exchange gas through. So whether they respire or transpire, that occurs through the stomata. And if you saw a leaf in profile under a microscope, there's actually more airspace inside a leaf.
So what are you doing? That's your favorite question. I had to ask you that. No, but is there more you'd like to add on monocots and dicots? Not that you couldn't talk for a whole day on them.
Yeah.
What do we need to know about them?
Look, they're both really important sources of human revenue. Was that the right way of putting it?
Yes.
Human resource?
Do they relate among themselves between the two genres?
Well, all
From a permaculture perspective, would you plant monocots and dicots like together, for
of
example?
course. I mean, bamboo, a really important fibre. Grass, an important food. All the grains, barley, wheat, rye.
What are
rice.
beans?
Beans are a legume. They're a dicotyledon.
So I've read that the Native Americans would plant. They called it the three sisters. They would have your corn, your
Yep.
squash,
Yep.
and your beans,
Yep.
all
So-
growing together. The beans would grow up the corn stalk,
Yep.
and the squash would kind of cover down underneath.
Yeah. So beans are a legume, which means they concentrate atmospheric nitrogen in their root systems, and then it's transferred into the surrounding soil. So they're really good for other plants because nitrogen is pretty important for the plants.
Well, now look, this brings up another really important thing. Tell us about nitrogen, because interestingly, nitrogen constitutes well over 70% of the air.
Mm-hmm.
yet we aren't able to use it directly as animals.
Well,
Isn't that right? So
you know,
the plants, it's essential for plants.
it's one essential for plants.
Yes, but I mean, but plants can use it, but animals can't. But so how do they? What does it do for plants?
Well, nitrogen and NPK, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, are three of the major elements that plants require, and then there are trace elements: molybdenum, manganese, boron, zinc, on and on and on, that they need in lesser amounts. So the three primary major elements plants need in an abundance in varying ratios. Nitrogen, in really simple terms, is responsible for assisting with photosynthesis and growth.
Yes.
Mostly of the upper parts of plants, rather than the roots or flowering, that sort of thing. But that's a complicated discussion. But
Yes.
in simple terms, that's what it does.
Well, may I share something interesting with you?
Mm-hmm.
Last year, there was this man whose research I'd been hearing about for a long time, and I finally broke down and bought this really rare book that he wrote. And he was a professional chemist in America, and he was the editor of a major journal of chemistry for the industry. But in this journal, it wasn't so much about the industrial stuff. It was he had his own column where he did all these sort of speculations and ideas and just stuff he had been thinking about that wasn't part of scientific publications. And one of the things I read, and I can actually send this to you if I can find it, he was talking about the presence of nitrogen in the atmosphere. And he talked about how Nikola Tesla had an idea to develop a process to extract nitrogen for the atmosphere. But what he said was, he related it to one of the main things that happens with scuba divers is if you stay down too long, if you stay down and then you come up too fast, you start getting the bends, and which has to do with something that happens with the nitrogen in our blood. And then there's another syndrome called nitrogen narcosis, rapture of the deep, and that's when people kind of get a bit loony and stuff like that. And so his hypothesis was that because of the extraordinarily high nitrogen content of the air, that humanity is in a constant state of mild nitrogen narcosis. How funny is that?
I often wonder if rather than, a normal atmosphere, the atmosphere is actually not laughing gas,
Well, that's helium, right? No, it's nitrous oxide.
How we
That's
like
right.
to laugh at the most inane things. But,
Helium makes your voice sound like this.
Yep. So I often wonder whether there's not an abundance of laughing gas in the atmosphere. But anyway, it's another story, I suppose.
Yes. Well, so now, but you said monocots and dicots can, of course, they interact harmoniously because they both thrive in the same environments on the same planet.
Yeah.
But
not uncommonly, no. In many different environments, and in a cultivating sense, it makes sense to grow a climber on a support. So the corn is the support and the climber is the bean.
Yes, this is kind of a mechanical common sense kind of thing.
That's a mechanical common sense thing.
Well, now let me ask you this: in terms of you're very interested in what we call permaculture, and it's interesting. I don't think Bill Mollison created the term, but he did popularize it. He came out with that big, massive textbook, and I actually met him once, many years ago in Queensland, and gave him a painted rock. And he lived here in Tasmania. I think he was actually from here.
Yep.
But so, tell us exactly. What does permaculture mean to you, and as this new project that you're embarking on down south here? What is your vision for that?
Well, I mean,
tell us about your vision of permaculture-wise for this new little project that you're embarking on, and what the basic principles of it actually are.
Well, permaculture is a contraction of permanent agriculture, where you, instead of growing monocultures of one crop, which is often fraught with all sorts of problems,
Because it uses up all the same shit year after year, right? All the same nutrients.
Well, not only that, but when it comes to pests and diseases,
Yes.
if there's one monocultural crop, it's a great big target for a pest or a disease. Whereas if there's great diversity, like you'd find in nature in a natural jungle or a forest, that kind of mixes things up, where insects and predators become confused because there's so much natural diversity. So permaculture is based on that principle, where you will grow not only multiple crops together, but multiple layers of crops
To confuse the enemy.
pretty much to confuse the enemy, and to confuse the enemy, whether it's a macro or a micro enemy, whether it's an insect or some sort of mammalian pest or something like that. It tends to just break everything up, and it's generally healthy, really.
Well, so what are you going to do with your new project? Are you focusing on permaculture plants that are going to be for food? Is this what you're going to do, or have you thought that far ahead yet?
I haven't really. It's just genesis of ideas. There's so many ideas that one could put together, but generally, because it's only a small area, it's only 30 or 40 acres.
But you're in charge of that whole thing.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So you'll have people helping you. They'll do what you say.
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. Point the finger.
That could be dangerous.
I'm good at pointing the finger. And
do you have something to lean on while you hold the sign?
Yeah, I got dark sunnies and a rifle and
a yellow vest
and a cane. No, it's because it's a small area.
Fruit orchards and grapes.
Probably it could be. I'm sort of thinking,
lavender.
No, that's been done to death. Probably I'm thinking saffron, hydroponic saffron, maybe truffles.
Well, now, why hydroponic? Now tell us about that. It means this is just off the top of my head. It means growing plants without soil, like in a liquid solution.
Yeah.
But why? Why do that?
Okay. So saffron is a bulb, and it's very hard to harvest.
Is it a herb or a spice?
It's a bulb. It's a spice.
But you use it for.
It's a very very expensive spice.
Yes, I've heard of it. It's like it has that high. It's like It's like the platinum of the plant kingdom.
Yeah, and really only because its cultivation is not so difficult. But most people grow it in the ground, which doesn't make any sense to me, because there's always, in natural soil, you're going to have weeds, and it's only a little bulb and a little plant.
Is it a low yield crop?
It's a low yield crop, so you need a lot of it. And the other thing, it's low to the ground, so you've got to be on your hands and knees to pick it, and it's very fiddly to pick. So my thing is to grow it at waist height, hydroponically, in a soilless media. Which is all what this hydroponics means. It just means without soil. But just about every single plant you buy from every single nursery is grown hydroponically, because in principle hydroponics is growing a plant in a soilless media and fed by liquid feed. So,
but isn't that? To me, it sounds like we're assuming that we know everything the plants need from the soil, and that because they can't, we have to give it to them in the water. Whereas with the soil, there may be stuff there they don't need, but they can pick and choose what they want. But in the water, the solutions, it's only got what people put.
Yeah, but we pretty well know what a plant needs. That science is pretty well established.
They need some love, don't they?
Well, yeah, it helps, I suppose, but it's not. I've growled at many a plant, and they've grown beautifully for me. So. Yeah,
but didn't you get indigestion when you?
No, not at all. No, I'm not going to indulge that.
They're too kind. They don't hold a grudge.
Yeah, no, they don't have the ability to hold a grudge. I've growled at many a plant and threatened them, and they grow beautifully for me. And often plants will grow much better when they're under great stress.
Well, yes, that's when they think they're running out of water, they'll go to seed quicker, right?
Yeah, they'll fruit better because when they think they're going to
die. They want to create their.
They want to survive.
Yeah.
And that's what plants do. It's what animals do. They live to reproduce and go forth and multiply, basically. That's what they do. That's their main purpose, is to reproduce. What if
the next level of evolution was beyond just multiplying? They learn how to extract the square root and do trigonometry.
Well, they'll never be...
Botanical trigonometry.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's going to happen. Their nervous systems aren't complex enough to maintain that level
Abstract thinking.
abstract, any
They wouldn't
thinking.
find it of use. But there's this really interesting guy named Jeremy Narby who wrote an interesting book about ayahuasca and information transfer, non-sensory information transfer, exactly like what we were talking about. Then his second book is called Intelligence in Nature, and it's a collection of essays where he's looking at the I word and with respect to many, many, many different examples of all the different kingdoms of life. And I asked him if he would do an interview with me about his impressions of intelligence of the whales and dolphins, and he declined because he goes like, oh, they've already had so much attention paid to them. I'm trying to deal with other ones like the cellular slime mold, and things like that. But he was talking about, he's somebody very interesting that you might be interested in checking out.
Look, as I said before,
he said that plants don't need brains because they kind of are brains. How about that? Is that like
the
what you were saying?
the whole of nature is intelligent. Intelligence is in everything. What we perceive as reality is multifaceted, but we only necessarily perceive one aspect of that depending on our resonance, on our tuning to something. You can tune to different television stations and radio stations, and depending on your level of awareness and consciousness, we can tune to the heart of nature, which is intelligence. It's the same intelligence as our own intelligence. So our inert or our inherent intelligence is exactly the same as Mother Nature's intelligence. So when we go within and understand our core intelligence, our core consciousness, pure consciousness, we're tuning into nature's pure consciousness as well. So we can understand the plant kingdom at that level. That's how we can understand which plant we put together to make ayahuasca or whatever else it is.
It might be guiding us itself.
Yeah, there's a relationship. There's all the nature of the physical world is multifaceted. We can look at this chair and it's a chair, but at the same time it's a chair. If that was still a growing piece of bamboo, there'd be a molecular value to that piece of bamboo. There's the outer value, of course, the obvious outer value, but there's a molecular value, there's a cellular value, there's an atomic value, there's a quantum value, all at the same time. But we're only tuning into one aspect of that gross level of that. If we're able to tune into the finer values of that material life, then we can tune into the consciousness or understand what the plant is actually saying in its own simple way by just being. We tune into its being.
Is the snow that's falling a result of climate change?
Climate's always changed. If they're going to come up with something, at least call it something different. The climate's been changing ever since the planet had an atmosphere.
Exactly. That's what I'm always saying. You know what I say? This is scientifically true. The only way to get rid of climate change is to get rid of the Earth's atmosphere. Because if you've got an atmosphere,
it's beyond ridiculous,
isn't it?
It's so far beyond ridiculous. It's not even worth.
Well, how about
to demonize the gas of life, carbon dioxide is borderline wicked.
Well, but this might be the most important thing we're talking about. So explain your incredulity and your indignation and your outrage, like I have, at the stupidity of people that can somehow believe that. They can believe that something that is the oxygen of the plant kingdom can be, I think a lot of people they're confusing it with carbon monoxide, the shit that comes out of the tailpipe of your car, that is poisonous. It sounds almost the same.
Could.
But that's no excuse.
In simple terms, right? Plants use carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis, right? And as a result of that, they transpire, or they produce oxygen as a byproduct. We take in oxygen as an important gas and produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct. So there's this beautiful symbiosis between us and the plant kingdom. So Now, the idea that carbon dioxide is a major player in influencing planetary atmosphere is ridiculous.
Well, let me ask you this, but
Just hang on a minute, because the drivers of planetary climate, there are two things: that big warm thing up in the sky, and water vapor. That's what drives the climate on a planet. Carbon dioxide, there's a value, but it's very much a bit player. It's certainly not a major player in planetary climate.
How could it be? Because it's the amount of it there is a trace gas. There's like 0.03%. It's in parts per million. But see, but isn't that interesting that the plant kingdom can thrive with that little carbon dioxide, whereas thanks to them, we've got about 16% oxygen in the air, and I don't know how low down the oxygen level can go that animals could still function, probably significantly lower. But from what I've heard, is actually we're probably close to the lower limit of how little carbon dioxide there could be and have plants still be perfectly healthy. Because from what I understand, in the Carboniferous era, there was 9,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and everything, it didn't burn up. It was just, it was lush.
And the temperature wasn't...
No, it was tropical.
Look, you know, what I say to people, I mean, I could say a lot of things to people, but I say to them, look, you know, go and mow your lawn and pile up a pile of grass clippings. What happens to it? Well, it gets hot. Yeah, it does get hot. Well, we can explain why it gets hot, but then what happens after it gets hot? Well, it shrinks. Aha, that's the interesting point. So it shrinks. So you have a body of biomass, say you have a cubic metre of biomass of grass clippings, and it heats up for various reasons, for a reason, won't go into that, but basically it reduces in size. That's significant. So consider the coalfields of the planet. Consider the Morwell, the Valley, Yallourn Valley, and the Newcastle coalfields. Consider the amount of vegetation it would have taken using that principle, because that principle hasn't changed, to create that amount of coal, right? Vast amounts of soft vegetation to make that coal, because in the Carboniferous, mosses were as big as gum trees, and they were as big as gum trees because there was such an abundance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're actually in a carbon dioxide drought.
Yes.
You know, carbon dioxide's a heavy gas, and the reasons it's heavy because it sits low in the atmosphere so plants can use it. That's why it is what it is. You know, people don't, it's all very nice, all this stuff, but they don't seem to tell you that you know, during the day, plants through photosynthesis and transpiration, they release carbon dioxide, but at night that process changes. They respire. Instead of transpiring during the day, at night they respire, which means they take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide. So there's this natural balance. Every breath you take is 40,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Multiply that by 7 billion or whatever there it is on the planet, and that's quite a heavy load.
Well, that's just
that hasn't changed.
That's just the human mammals.
And that's just the human mammals. So is that is that upsetting the balance?
Well, what do you think of my idea that carbon dioxide morphs into the coronavirus to maintain its cover?
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not. I love a good conspiracy, but I don't know about that one, or 5G, whatever it is.
It's a joke, mate.
Yeah, okay.
Well, look, okay, so now tell us about, and I've actually looked into this, so I'm not just, this isn't just some random conspiracy theory. If you look at the molecular structure of chlorophyll and hemoglobin, the structure of the molecules is very close to being exactly the same. If you switch the central atoms, which in chlorophyll is magnesium and in hemoglobin it's iron, and if you switch these two, you've got almost the same molecule.
Well, you know, if you want to relate chlorophyll to human blood, there's also another great similarity in that, you know, human blood is made up of white and red platelets.
Yep. The lymphocytes.
You know, you look at a leaf and you think, you know, it's a green pigment, but it's not. What you're actually looking at in a green leaf at a microscopic level are thousands upon thousands of individual green platelets called chloroplasts. And they're not just sitting there fixed, they're actually moving around quite quickly through the vascular system of the leaf. So they're called streaming chloroplasts. So at the gross level of a leaf, it's just a green leaf. But if you move into or transcend through the layers of that leaf, there's not only great airspace inside a leaf, there's also little green things spinning around through the vascular system of the leaf. So
now, it's a bit like pixels
on newsprint or
yes.
on a computer screen.
Is that where does the photosynthesis take place in the chloroplasts?
In the chloroplasts, yeah. And then, you know, basically in a leaf you've got two outer layers, the cuticle. You've got a layer of cells called the palisade layer, which are sort of vertical cells which are responsible for sort of structure, and then there's a layer called spongy mesophyll, which is like a sponge, all inside a leaf.
Yes. Well,
and that contains lots of air, and that's responsible for movement around the chloroplasts, and then the stomata release the photos, you know, the
yes.
gases.
Well, would you say that the chloroplasts,
to the free atmosphere,
the chloroplasts are to the plant kingdom as mitochondria are to the animal kingdom?
More or less.
Okay.
In a way, yeah, more or less.
Very cool.
More or less. Yeah.
Okay, now on a slightly different subject, tell us about the tree rings.
Well,
is it true that they make that they make one each year, or if it doesn't grow, it may not make one?
Oh, they'll always make
the ring?
one.
What is the ring?
But well, a tree ring. Okay, so this is a major difference between a monocot and a dicot. In a dicotyledon, we have what's called a vascular cambium, and that's a ring of cells. It's a sheath around that's between the xylem and the bark, and then a layer called the phloem, and that's what's called a meristematic zone in the plant. Meristematic means that it's a growing part of the plant. It's able to reproduce itself, multiply itself. So meristematic zones are in the root tips and the vascular cambium and in buds. And then and the vascular cambium is responsible for circumferential growth of a dicotyledon. Monocotyledons don't have a vascular cambium, so they can't circumferentially expand. That's why bamboo is straight up and down. That's why a palm tree is straight up and down. It's why sugarcane's straight up and down, whereas a gum tree or an oak is tapered. And that's because they have a vascular cambium. If you cut into the side of a palm tree, it can't repair itself. If you cut into the side of an oak tree with a snigget, with a bulldozer or a chainsaw, it will repair itself because the vascular cambium, being meristematic, which means it can grow, if it's been damaged, it can regrow and heal that particular wound. Whereas in a monocot, that can't happen.
Yes, very interesting. Now let me ask you about the root structure of plants. Would you say, is it inaccurate to say or to visualize that if we think of a tree and we think of the trunk and the limbs, but would you say that for every tree, more or less, there's an equivalent volume
Yep.
of and complexity of structure of the roots? It's almost like it's relatively symmetrical.
Yep, absolutely. What's above ground is above ground.
So we've been blind. We're root blind.
Well, yeah, because it's not something you see. But if you were to pull a tree out and strip away all its roots, it would be the same, you know, great huge
Cover
oak
the same
tree would
area.
be the same area. It mightn't be the same orientation.
Yes.
It might be.
Because they're reaching for water rather than air. I mean, sunlight, right?
Yeah, they're responding to moisture, roots. Again, that's a hydrotrophism, I suppose. And you know, depending on the nature of the soil and what's in the soil, the roots will, you know, if there's a foot of soil and then solid rock, well then the roots can't penetrate that rock, so they'll grow out laterally, but there'll still be the equivalent amount of roots in the ground
Yes.
as to above ground.
Will they seek different patches of, like if there's a pocket of soil that's got more of a certain mineral they want, they'll find that, right?
They're responding more to moisture. And if there happens to be that mineral in that moisture-laden soil, well, it's just their good luck.
Yes.
Because generally speaking, you don't have that sort of isolation of minerals in a soil profile.
Okay. Now, how about this? Tell us about the succulents and the cacti.
What about?
Speaking of water, they're like the camels of the plant kingdom, right?
Yep. Yeah. They have adaptations. A lot of plants have adaptations, whether they're root adaptations or stem adaptations, which have adapted to particular environments. So a succulent
prevents evaporation and prevents getting eaten easily.
Yeah,
by
well,
predators.
in a lot of the succulents, they have stomata, but they're hidden, same as in the conifers. They're hidden in grooves in the leaf so that they're protected, and all the stomata in a dicot are under the leaf because that's the coolest part of the leaf. And they open and close. And so the same for succulents. They have stomata as well, but they're in a different structure in the succulent or the cacti.
Yes.
And they're swollen stems basically. They're adapted to hold moisture, like a potato or carbohydrate in a potato.
Well, you know what? You know what boab trees are, right?
Yep.
I've seen ones that had a faucet drilled into it, and they would let water run out, like they're filled with water.
Yep.
I felt sorry for the tree, but
You don't need to feel sorry for the tree.
why not?
Well, you're allowed to. If you want to feel sorry for the tree, feel sorry. But I'm sure it'll be like a pimple on an elephant's bum. I don't think it's really going to bother it that much. But you're welcome to feel sorry for it if you like.
Okay, now let me ask you this. Let me run a few plants by you.
Yep.
And you just say first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
Tomato.
Tasty.
Potato. Mispronounced?
Just as tasty but poisonous.
Well, now tell us about that.
Okay, so
is it the skin that's poisonous?
No.
Only
Look,
if they're green?
within the plant world, there are great groups of plants called, and they, because of common characteristics, they're grouped into what we call families.
And this is the nightshade family, right?
And so the nightshade family, or Solanaceae, one of the characteristics of the group of plants called Solanaceae is that they all contain a toxic alkaloid called solanine. So it can be neutralised through cooking and whatnot, but nonetheless, they all contain solanine.
And what other nightshades other than tomatoes and potatoes?
So tomato, potato, eggplant.
Really?
Yep. Native solanums.
Do you know what okra is? Okra.
Yeah, more
It's
or
very
less.
unique. I don't know. It's from Africa. I don't think it's a member of that family.
No.
But if you cook these, it neutralizes the solanine.
Yeah, well, if you want to see it for yourself, steam up some capsicum and then dip your finger into that sort of discoloured water at the bottom of your saucepan and have a taste and see how pleasant that is. Or
Really?
get an eggplant and salt it and then taste that brown liquid that comes out after the salting and see how pleasant that is.
All right.
So that's solanine. And look, it's not going to kill anybody, but there's all sorts of talk about it producing arthritic responses and whatnot. So,
Yes. Well, okay, avocado.
Avocado is a good thing.
It's a nut, isn't it?
No, it's a one-seeded berry. It's an unusual
A
fruit.
one-seeded. Is there any other examples of that?
No, not that I know of.
A one-seeded berry.
Yeah, when I was teaching botany, I had a problem with that. I had to ask a colleague, what do you reckon an avocado is morphologically or anatomically? Or by definition, what is that? We were talking about...
But reiterate,
what's a berry and
strawberries aren't. What are they?
Strawberries and a cane. Okay, so the actual fruit of a strawberry is the little crunchy bit that gets stuck in your teeth on the outside, and that's an achene, and that's just like a sunflower.
And how do you spell that?
Achene.
Okay.
And that, imagine you've got a sunflower seed stuck on the outside of the red bit that you eat is not actually a fruit.
Okay.
Now, a raspberry is a drupe fruit, like a cherry or a plum. And... what was the other one? Blackberries the same. They're drupes.
What about blueberries?
Blueberries a berry.
Okay.
Yeah, blueberries, bananas a berry.
A banana is a berry.
Bananas a berry.
Now this is like we're turning over a lot of misconceptions here. Strawberry's not a berry.
No.
Banana's a berry.
Yeah.
Avocado's
A one-seeded berry, which is probably a convenience to call it that. But bananas, if you see natural wild bananas that haven't been manipulated for however many years, they have really large seeds in them and they're really inedible.
Yes.
And they're multiple seeded structures. So yeah,
Yes.
bananas a berry, pumpkins a berry, zucchinis a berry, tomatoes a berry.
What's a dingleberry?
I don't know what a dingleberry is.
What's a beetroot?
A beetroot is just a swollen stem. It's a swollen storage stem.
So same
not,
with parsnip and turnip and carrot.
Yeah, just a swollen storage root. That's all they are. Potatoes a stem, a swollen stem, and we know it's a stem because if you leave that out in the light, it'll start to photosynthesize and go green and produce shoots. Just what stems do.
Well, what about
carrots? Won't do that.
What about nuts?
Nuts are their own category. They're a fruit, but they're just within their own category of
But
fruit.
is it related to a seed?
Yeah, they are seeds, but they're a different, an akene, which is a type of, fruits are categorised. They have particular characteristics that puts them into a specific grouping. So akenes are things like, typical example is sunflower seed. The actual sunflower seed is the fruit. And then a caryopsis is a thing, typically a grain of rice or wheat is a caryopsis. And a hesperidium is the citrus family. Berries are what they are. Pumpkins and tomatoes and bananas.
Squash and gourds.
Squash and gourds, they're all berries. Drupes are fruits that have a hard seed or a seed contained within a hard shell, so plums and peaches. And
Well, what about an ear of corn? How did that come about?
An ear of corn is a caryopsis, a group of carrots. It's same structurally the same as a grain of rice or wheat.
What's an artichoke?
Artichoke's a flower.
A flower. And so the pulpy thing that you eat is the...
Yep, it's an unripe flower.
Okay. Now what about garlic and turmeric?
Well, turmeric's a rhizome, which is a horizontal underground perinating organ or an underground horizontal swollen stem, just like ginger or canna lilies. Garlic is a
Is it like an onion?
No, garlic is a non-tunicate bulb, and an onion is a tunicate bulb. Tunicate bulb is a bulb that is made up of layers. Non-tunicate, I think there's another name for it, I can't think of it, is just a solid bulb without layers.
Yes.
So that's garlic.
Now, what do you know about indigenous bush tucker?
Quite a bit.
Is there any in the yard here?
Not that I can see.
What would be something that you... tell me about the Tasmanian pepperberries and where we can find some. Can you take me to go and pick some? But is that indigenous? Is that bush tucker? They're very beautiful.
It's local to Tasmania, but not only Tasmania. It's in Victoria as well. You got to remember, in relating back to climate change, 10,000 years ago, you could have walked from Tasmania to the mainland, because sea levels are about 90 metres lower than what they are now.
You know
That's
what?
about the average
I think
depth.
I actually made that trip.
That's about the average depth of Port Phillip Bay. It's quite shallow.
Yes.
So you could have walked, the bay in Melbourne was a broad grassy plain with the Yarra running through it. So the flora of Tasmania is not that different to mainland Australian flora, Victorian flora. So yeah, Tasmania is in Victoria as well.
Yes. Okay, now how about this? One of my favorite Australian plants is the xanthoria.
Yep, grass trees. Why? What about it?
They look really cool.
They do look cool, yeah. Xanthoria and
They've got this resin that comes out that you can burn.
It's a beautiful resin.
It smells like
beautiful.
barbecue sauce. But I
think it'd make a good incense.
Well, but check this out. There's one that's even nicer. And you know what? Maybe in honor of tonight, I'll actually burn some. In the Flinders Ranges, there's these. I believe they're cedar trees that are indigenous. They're not really big, but they're trees. And they put out this resin that just kind of runs down the bark. And it's not anything wrong with it. They just do it. And I learned about it when I was there. We've been able to gather some of it, and it's the most beautiful smelling incense that I've ever smelled.
I'd like to.
And so, so all your like sandalwood, that's a tree, right?
Yeah, yes,
And,
it
and
is.
all the
And
instances.
there's native sandalwood and there's exotic sandalwoods. Yeah.
Now, what about
Santalum.
what is it, what is a herb? What does that mean? Does that imply culinary use?
No, it doesn't. I mean,
Is it a
in
botanical?
general, well, it's more of a botanical term. You know, in general parlance, you know, for the common person, a herb is a soft plant that you eat. But a herb is a botanical term. It can also be called a forb, which basically
FORB. FORB.
yeah, FORB, a forb, which is also basically a soft-stemmed plant that's either annual or perennial, sometimes biennial, which basically a soft-stemmed plant herbaceous plant. Herbaceous means soft.
But does it mean you can eat it?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
No,
What's
there's plenty
dandelion? Is dandelion a herb?
Yeah, it's herbaceous. Herbaceous means it's herb-like. And herbaceous basically means soft. So there's herbaceous perennials, which are soft perennials. The word perennial means living more than 3 years. So
really?
a herbaceous perennial is a plant that has annual growth but dies down to a rootstock and then regrows again perennially.
So most weeds would actually be herbs.
Yeah, well, if it's a soft weed, it's a herb. Herb is a generic term.
So tell us what's the
Doesn't mean you have
what's
to
a
connect it.
weed? It's like the plant equivalent of vermin or
You know,
pest.
by definition.
It could be anything people
Yeah,
don't like, right?
Yeah. By definition,
It's in the wrong place.
It's the definition of weed is something that's growing in where it shouldn't be or where it's unwanted, or where. But you know,
What if somebody likes it but somebody else doesn't? Then which is it?
well, then it's just a matter of definitions.
It's schizophrenic.
It's a matter of definitions. I mean,
It's got phytophrenia.
I regard weeds as
Food.
resources
Yes.
that can be used in management of various horticultural situations. I mean,
Well,
they
what
can
about-
be a problem, but they can also be useful.
What about comfrey? Now
What
that's
about
just you
comfrey?
plow that under into the soil, right?
Yeah. Well, that can be a hell of a weed. In you know, the more you disturb comfrey, the more it wants to grow. If you because it grows from root cuttings, it
Yes.
grows from root disturbance. So the more you disturb it, the more it's going to love you because it'll just keep growing.
It's like kicking over the anthill.
Yeah.
Well, what about this? I've heard that kale, that farmers can take if they've got a paddock that's had DDT on it for 20 years or just chemicals, atrazine or whatever, blah blah blah. They can plant a crop of kale and let it grow to fruition because it sucks up all the shit out of the soil, and then they take that kale and throw it away because it cleansed the soil. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah. Look, I haven't heard of that specifically, but it's not. See,
What do you call plants like that? Or I mean, is there a category for ones
there's not a
they're sort of like
strippers.
they're very proficient at uptaking anything out of the soil.
Yeah, but any
do they think they're going to use it?
No. It's like a plant.
It's like a vacuum.
No, a plant doesn't discriminate. You know, it doesn't have the ability to discriminate. That's why you can poison a plant. It doesn't have the ability to say, I don't want that.
For real?
Yes. You know, it's why you can kill a plant with poison or a herbicide. It doesn't have the ability to distinguish it. It just takes up a liquid through osmosis, through its roots or through its foliage.
But could they
And
learn
if it's
that?
toxic,
Could they learn that as an intelligent being?
you gotta be careful of what you mean by intelligence.
Well, but that's exactly why I'm asking. Where do you draw the line? Isn't learning one of the hallmarks of intelligence?
Yeah, but the plant doesn't have a nervous system that's capable of rational learning. It just responds to its environmental stimulus. You know, if it's cold, it stops growing. If it's really cold, it dies. If it's really hot, it dies. And it's as a result of all these external stimuli.
Well, here's a very
It's not
important
that-
question.
But then there are those exceptions, as I said, where that you have these extraordinary relationships between the plant and animal kingdom, the extraordinary symbioses, which go beyond random.
As if their consciousnesses have been co-evolving.
But there's co-consciousness that works with it.
Yes.
It's
Well, give us an example.
well, you know, when you mentioned Findhorn before.
Yep.
And one of the things that was predominant at Findhorn was an understanding that there are sub-kingdoms that we're not necessarily aware of, but could be, which have a great association with the plant kingdom, and in folklore that's referred to the pixies and the elves
And the devas.
and the devas. But so the Devic kingdoms are those subtle impulses or impulses of intelligence that work with the plant kingdom. So it's not so much the plant, it's the intelligent individuals that work with the plants that do the actual work. The plant's just a kind of the clay that the devas can actually use to manipulate to affect.
Are they like kind of like it's the animating chi of the plants, or are they sort of more like guides or
they're more
orchestrators or administrators?
If you want to put it into a definition, they're more like associates. They're like the director of the play. So the plant world is like the clay. The devas are the intelligence that mould the clay. Is one way of putting it, I guess. But so the plant is innocent. The Devic world does the manipulation. That's more of a dynamic of intelligence, of consciousness.
Are the devas, are they aware of us?
Yeah. Very. Yeah.
Well, now let me ask you this. Do plants feel or experience pain?
No.
Because some people think they do.
No, they haven't got... You see, consciousness... The dictates of consciousness are tied intimately to a nervous system. And, depending on how intricate and complex a nervous system is, the consciousness will be reflected as a result of that. So the nervous system of a dog or a cat or a bug or a flea or the plant can only reflect whatever that nervous system can maintain, the energy of the consciousness that nervous system can maintain.
Well, are you familiar with Rupert Sheldrake's idea of the morphogenetic field? It's a field that sort of like his example is that, he's pretty big time. He was from Oxford and stuff. You might find that very interesting to check it out. He says that, for example, if you remember what they call Curlian photography.
Auras.
Yeah, that the Curlian photography would, you could take a leaf that was broken off, but with the photography, the whole thing would still be there. And so, he said this is the field, and he said this is how growth happens. That the plant actually grows into the field. So the field could potentially be kind of like an etheric equivalent of the nervous system.
Yeah, well, but even in the etheric, it's only as complicated as it's as complicated. Yes, there is, like if you take a single leaf, there's, as I said before, and I like to use the leaf as an example because it can show you quite dramatically the multiple layers of what's involved. So if you take a leaf, the outer value of that leaf is just a green smooth leaf or a green prickly leaf or whatever it is, but if you go within with a microscope, the inner fabric of that leaf, you see that what I said before, the chloroplasts are spinning around, streaming around, there's lots of space in there, there's gaseous exchange, there's this little factory. But if we go further into the leaf, there's a cellular level. There's all these cells that are differentiated into different jobs. If we go further into the structure of the leaf, to the molecular level, molecules. If we keep going deeper and deeper, we can go to the atomic level, to the subatomic level, to the quantum level, to the nothing level. And all of those different levels exist at the same time. It's just depending on what we resonate with and to what we tune in that we can see, and it's the same with the human system. There's the outer gross physical body, there's the There's the endocrine system, there's the vascular system, there's the hemic system, there's all these different systems, there's the muscular system, and again, break it down. Molecular system, cellular system, atomic system, subatomic system. There's the etheric body, there's an akashic body. We have all these, we're not just one simple thing, we're made up of lots of things, but we're only aware of, generally, of the one gross aspect of what we are.
Yes.
Which is only one little aspect of what we actually are.
Do you
We're
know
multi-dimensional beings.
You probably would have had you could talk with Rudolf Steiner about this.
Yep, could talk with Steiner if he was around.
I didn't ask you about him yet, but look, let me ask you this while we're still on plants. Why are flowers so many different colors, and why are they so pretty? Is it to attract pollinating insects?
Well,
or is it for our eyes to see the colors?
Because the creator is an artist, and the creator is a scientist, and the creator likes to create. It likes the diversity. It's not just flowers, it's the birds, it's the bugs, it's the bees, it's the fish. You can ask the same question for the whole of nature. Why is there diversity? And that's the word universe.
What's beauty?
Beauty is whatever you think it is. It's in the eye of the beholder.
I'm describing it. Some of the most beautiful things I know, flowers and...
Yeah. So flowers are an expression of the creator, but they're
very
also
symbolic to humans.
Yeah, but they're also
edible.
Yeah, but there's also a very practical reason for flowers. Flowers, depending on their colour or their smell, attract particular vectors, whether it's a possum or an insect or a honey eater, to come and visit them.
They're the wedding gown for the seed.
Yeah, you could say that. And then in the case of an angiosperm, a gymnosperm, where, the flowering plants, that's where all the action happens. That's where the ovary is, that's where the ovules are that turn into seeds, which then become a new plant one day down the track.
Yes.
So the flower is again a multifaceted structure. It's not only there to attract something, whether it's a bee or a bird or an animal, or to be put into a bouquet for a wedding. It also has a utilitarian value, or an expressive value of the creator. The creator creates. That's what the word universe is, the unity in diversity, or diversity in the unity.
Well, what about the poem by Joyce Kilmer? I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. So do you like big trees?
Huh?
Have you been to the Styx Forest here down near Medina?
Yep.
I love that place. I actually feel like those trees actually recognized me the last time I went, because I'd been there many times before, but it had been several years. What were you going to say about the big trees?
I was going to do a little quote from Walt Whitman, but it doesn't matter.
No, what is it?
To see the universe in a grain of sand, and I can't remember the other
It's
bit.
William Blake.
Was it Blake?
Yes. To see the earth, see the world in a grain of sand, and eternity in an hour.
In an hour.
Something like that.
Yeah, I thought it was Walt Whitman.
Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night.
Isn't it Walt Whitman? I think it's Walt Whitman.
William Blake.
Let's just check that out, shall we?
They both could have said it.
Well, we'll check that out.
You just said it now.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think it's Walt Whitman, but anyway, well, whatever. I'm not going to argue, because I might be wrong. I've been known to be wrong on occasion.
What are you doing? Look, Rick, it's been fantastic talking with you. You're a veritable fountain of knowledge about a lot of different really cool stuff. And the plant kingdom, I love plants. And there's one that I didn't ask you about yet. My go-to cola, the Centella asiatica.
Got a cola, yeah. About it.
It's as I understand it, from what I've read, it's the most important plant in the entire Ayurvedic medicine tradition from India.
It's an important plant. I don't know if I'd say it was the most important plant. Brahmi's pretty important too.
Yes.
Bacopa.
Yes, these are all there. But a lot of their benefits are cognitive, aren't they?
Yeah. So Ayurveda is primarily a science that was developed to assist the development of consciousness or expansion of human consciousness, and plants play an important role in that, as does diet, as does music, as does architecture, as does all sorts of aspects of things. So
this is very Steinerian.
no, it's not Steinerian.
It's Vuatian.
It's
Vuatian.
no, it's knowledge that's available to anybody if they choose to look for it. And in order to look for it, one needs to be very still within.
And where is the kingdom of heaven?
It's within. The kingdom of heaven is within. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all of this stuff will be made available to you. The kingdom of heaven is knowledge of your true self, not your little ego self. When you understand what your true self is, then you realize that you can talk to plants and or understand what plants are about, and the animal kingdom and any other kingdom. And it's all about quietening the mind so that it's not rattling around and believing this and having an opinion about that or a judgment about that. It's about making the ego sit back and take a big old rest and let that creator that's created all of this, all the flowers, all the birds, all the bees, all the trees,
and the weeds and the vermin.
And the weeds and the vermin, yes, everything there is. The Creator doesn't judge. The Creator doesn't distinguish between those things. The Creator just creates.
Yes. Well, now, let me ask you this. Probably the most important question of the day. Do you ever hug trees?
I hug everything in my own way.
But I mean,
don't physically hug them.
Do you physically? Have you ever hugged a tree?
Yeah, sort of, I suppose.
Did you talk to it at the same time?
I talked to it in a whisper.
What did it say? Did it respond?
They do respond.
Because do you ever feel like sometimes that it may not want to be hugged on that particular day? I've actually asked before if I could.
Yeah, I don't play
like a
with
person.
Those
Not everybody
notions.
wants to be hugged.
Yeah, no,
it's a bit anthropocentric, isn't it? But they may have things we don't even understand.
Yeah, they're not generally that fussed about things, you know.
They've got all the time in the world.
To put human emotion and human understanding to a being like a tree isn't really of any great value, you know. If you want to hug it. Tree's not going to argue with you. But you can communicate with the plant world, you can communicate with the animal world, and all it takes is to be still. Well, be still and know that I am God.
Are trees fans of the furniture industry? Are trees fans of the furniture industry?
A tree's happy to be useful. A tree, you know, if you and nature's also really logical. You know, a tree can sacrifice itself to be something that humans love. It's happy for that. It's not quite as happy, I guess, if it's going to get turned into toilet paper to wipe someone's butt. But, you know, at a consciousness level, a tree's kind of happy to be turned into a nice comfy chair that someone's going to love. It's just another life for it. It's another incarnation for the tree.
Well, do you know what Senecio elegans is?
Yeah, I do.
That's my very favorite flower, and I've seen it grow in wild in Apollo Bay and in New Zealand, and it's from South Africa. But I felt that flower, it loves for me to feel the beauty of its colors, and it's actually I felt it laughing along with me on the dunes in New Zealand. So I love that plant.
You know, I'm a very practical person, but I can also tell you that the pixies, the Davic kingdom, respond really well to humans, and they really enjoy human company, and they look after plants. They're cheeky. They have their own temperaments and their own characteristics, a bit like a dog can have its own temperament and its own characteristic. The Davers are like that too. You know, they're cheeky, and if they meet someone that's resonating, if you like, at a higher value, they bow and respect them. And I know that's a bit esoteric and a bit wacky,
I felt that very powerfully, regularly.
And the plant kingdom will do the same. They, in their own simple way, because they're simple creatures, they do respond. They do respond. They respond to various tropisms. They do actually respond to being loved.
Well, do plants, they like music, don't they?
They respond to music.
Certain music. I'm guessing they probably would like my flute better than Metallica.
Yeah, they do. It's not essential, because a plant will grow quite happily without being exposed to music.
But do you think it might grow better with nice music? Aren't there stories of that, anecdotal?
Yeah, look, you know, if you find a nice jungle somewhere that hasn't been touched by humanity and by human music, it'll grow quite happily without our influence. But if you want to introduce music and a plant wants to feel the vibration of the music, then it's a new experience for it.
You couldn't have audioponics, could you? Ones that just grows on music with no water, soil, or chemicals.
Yeah, I don't think so. Plants.
Acoustoponics.
Yeah, no, plants have roots for a reason. They have leaves for a reason, just like we have a mouth and an asshole for a reason. We can take it in one end and whack it out the other end, and what we whack out the other end, plants really like. Again, another symbiosis.
Exactly. Hundertwasser wrote about the importance of having a positive relationship with our feces, because unless it's too toxified, it's like the ultimate fertilizer.
Well, it is. I mean, human feces is an incredibly wasted resource, because we eat such a varied diet. It's a bit like why pig shit's really good, because they eat a varied diet, an omnivore diet. So the more you put in, the more minerals and the more varieties of mineral and material that goes in, the more complex it goes out. It's a no-brainer. So
I'm privileged to be here again today for a more brief part 2 with Rick VUAT, the horticultural permaculture all-around good bloke. And I really want to thank you for your time. You've got very interesting things to say. But so one of the things I wanted to ask you about yesterday was, now this is a very, very huge and complex topic, but what would you say are some of the greatest dangers to the plant kingdom from human activity? Of course, the first thing I think of is pesticides and herbicides and stuff like that, chemicals.
how about stupidity?
Well, that's
big.
kind of the root of everything.
That kind of covers it all, really, doesn't it?
It does.
You could break it down to bulldozers and chainsaws.
Well, question: are plants capable of stupidity?
No, they just do what they do.
Okay, and they can't make mistakes.
They can't make those judgments. No, they do what they do. Stupidity and human emotions don't come into it.
Okay, but in terms of actual, so we put a lot of chemicals out into the environment, and you said yesterday that plants are indiscriminate uptakers of substances in the soil, so they don't really have any choice but to take up whatever's in there.
They're innocent.
And so, do you think there's any place left on Earth that has land that the only toxicity it would have of human origin is radionuclides from fallout and stuff? Is there any place where ground toxicity hasn't yet gone, like maybe remote areas in Africa or Indonesia, something like that?
Southwest Tasmania is probably a good candidate.
Yes. Could you do some permaculture down in the horizontal scrub?
No, leave the horizontal scrub alone.
Yes, I like that. That's where the thylacines can live.
That's where the thylacines can live, and we don't really need to be there. Go and muck around with permaculture where it's already been mucked around with.
Yes. Well, would you say Tasmania's soil is very rich and volcanic, right?
Not in generally, no.
Okay.
Where there are volcanoes, there are krasnozems, which are red soils, which are the result of very ancient lava flows. Krasnozem, it's a Russian word meaning red soil.
C-R-A-Z?
K-R-A-Z.
Very interesting.
Krasnozem. Other places, the various soils, sandy loams and clay loams and lacustrine, all sorts of different types of soils.
Yes.
can't generalise with that sort of thing.
Yes.
Depends on what they're made from. Types of rocks.
Now, we're in a makeshift greenhouse made of plastic, and we're
Yep.
hearing the flapping sound in the wind.
We are.
But it's not bothering me.
No, it's fine. It's what happens in a greenhouse.
Well, how about this? Look around, and as your eye falls on each plant, tell me what it is and what it's good for.
Tomatoes,
Yes.
like a Persicum esculentum, basil, Basilicum ossumum. Now I'm starting to get smart.
No, but please do. This is cool. The botanical name is very interesting.
Well, there's celery and there's...
What's celery? Caleritas?
No, I'm not. Appium something or other, I guess. I'm not
Okay.
sure. Appium unsuriensis, I don't know. There's silver beet, Beta vulgaris.
Kale?
There's parsley, Petroselinum crispum.
Yes.
There's fennel, Feniculum vulgari.
That's good.
Vulgari meaning common.
Okay. There's some gourds.
There's some gourds and
Gordus maximus?
don't know. There's some capsicum there, Solanum something or other.
Yes.
Or white aubergine, maybe Solanum melangena.
Yes.
There's a kale and some things I don't know. I mean, like, the botanical name.
Yes.
There's a weed there, Euphorbia peplis. Good for killing warts.
Really?
Don't eat it.
What about dandelion?
What about dandelion? Good
Well,
for you. Eat 'em.
it's supposedly good for you to eat. Make tea out of the leaves.
Yeah, they're harmless enough.
Can you eat the flower?
Probably. Don't quote me though.
Well,
Go.
I guess I should distinguish between whether you can just eat something and still be okay, versus eating something and actually deriving benefit from it.
Generally, if one part of the plant's okay to eat, the other plant is, but there are exceptions.
Okay.
But generally, as a general rule, that applies.
Okay. Well, now here's one for you. In the paradigm of, you probably know about what they call biodynamic farming. That's
Yeah.
Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah, I know
Now,
about biodynamic.
now tell us about that in a nutshell. My only experience is that once this guy on Flinders Island was mixing up a barrel full of stuff, and he was stirring it in a certain direction, and he had to twirl it in a certain direction, and it had something from bones or cow bone or something like that in there. But so is there a scientific basis to this, or is it kind of like
It's
superstitious, or
No, it's a subtle science.
Yes.
It's an esoteric science. It's what you're talking about is a preparation called 500, which they make by putting cow manure into cow horns and then burying it a certain way. And then there is an interesting thing that they do, which are called peppers, which is where they get the particular thing that they want to deal with, say a fox, and they burn the skin to an ash.
of a fox?
Yeah, burn the skin to an ash and then mix it with silica and make a preparation and sprinkle that around. Apparently that, deters foxes or gorse or blackberries or whatever.
So it's
and
kind
I
of
have
like
actually seen some interesting aerial footage from New Zealand of peppers that work.
For real? So it's like
Yep.
a reverse homeopathic repellent.
Yeah,
thing or something like that.
I saw a picture of a patch of gorse, a few acres of gorse that had been treated with a gorse pepper, and they weren't growing there. So I'm not really sure the background of it, but Steiner was pretty clever.
Yes. Well, now two things in the biodynamic paradigm and or the permaculture paradigm, are fertilizers allowed or useful, or is it more broadly defined as any sort of like would, for example, bone meal, would that be considered a fertilizer or a nutrient that you add?
It'll be an added nutrient that'll contain various useful minerals for plants, for sure. Bone meal, any sort of organic matter that's been broken down. You've got to understand that the plant takes up a fertilizer or a nutrient at an atomic level.
Yes.
So the whole idea of organic versus non-organic's a little bit contentious, I think, because at the level that the plant takes it up, as I just said, is at an atomic level. So whether it comes out of a cow's backside or a packet, the plant still utilises it at the atomic level, which is non-organic.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of ethics, I suppose, and you know, lack of heavy metals and these types of things that you might find in sort of manufactured commercial fertilisers. But bone meal and all these sorts of things, any sort of organic carbon-based material.
Like sea salt, kelp.
Yeah, look, they have trace elements. You wouldn't want to grow everything with those sorts of things. You know, those seaweed kelp products. You know, they're useful.
Yeah.
And you know, they add nutrients and things, but or trace elements rather. But you wouldn't fertilise a whole crop with those.
Well, now when you're growing something hydroponically, what all goes into the water?
Oh well, it can be an organic-based fertiliser mix, or it can come out of a packet. So it'll just, depending on what you're growing, and depending on what time of year you're growing it, it'll be some combination of NPK and trace elements. It just depends on what you're growing, and you know you don't go. And unless you've got the ability to lengthen the day length with lights and temperature, you know, if you're relying on natural light and natural temperature, you can only make a plant grow so much. You know, giving it too much nutrients probably going to kill it.
Well, yes, I think when we were trying to grow a garden in Darwin several years ago, and mainly in a bed of sawdust, but we put soil in there to get the plants going, and some things seems to do well, and a lot of things got really big and bushy, like the eggplant and the tomatoes, but they weren't making any fruit. But the plant was healthy, and everybody reckoned it was because I was overwatering it. Could that be true?
Well, it's probably overfeeding it, if anything. I mean, growing in, if it's old, really old sawdust, you can.
No, it was new.
New sawdust, you're lucky to grow anything, because with a hard material like that, whether it's hardwood sawdust or softwood sawdust,
Combination of both.
we have, when that hits the soil, a thing called nitrogen drawdown, which is where the soil bacteria or microbes break down that organic matter. Because it's hard to break down, they pull a lot of nitrogen out of the soil, which competes with what the plant's doing. So if you use something like that, you've got to put quite a bit of nitrogen to counteract that.
Okay.
So it wouldn't have been overwatering, it would have been the amount of fertiliser you've chucked at it to make it grow. Probably.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
And what they'll do is they'll put on growth as opposed to fruit, because fruiting is usually a response to
stress,
often
when
a
it thinks it's
response
going
to
to die.
some sort of stress.
Yes,
Not always,
yes.
but you know, they will respond to a stressor like it's going to die. Yep.
Yes. Okay, now how about the whole concept of what we call people that farm deal with the pests like insects and things like that? And so what about in biodynamics and permaculture? How do you deal with that kind of thing?
Well, permaculture and biodynamics are two different things.
Exactly.
Permaculture sort of relies very much on diversity. So instead of having a monoculture of one thing which can be attacked by a specific pest or disease, you have an abundance of variety.
So they're confused.
So they're more or
they're
less
distracted.
confused. They're
They can't
distracted,
make
they're
up their mind.
confused. Yeah, they sort of, oh, it's one of them, and what are we going to do with that? So they sort of, it's maximising space, I suppose,
Yes.
where you're growing multiple things in the one place. You know, I mean, your average Mediterranean backyard in the suburbs of Melbourne or Sydney back in the day would have been a permaculture garden.
Yeah.
You would have found herbs and greens and fruit trees and grapes and vines, and that's a permaculture basically. It's been going on for a long time.
Yes.
Just in the Greek and Italian backyards of Melbourne or Sydney.
Yes. Well, now what about the dangers of agricultural pest control, like at the industrial level?
Oh, well,
This is where all the-
when you got acres and acres of some monoculture crop that's being attacked by something, and they fly over it with a plane or boom spray or whatever and hit it with some herbicide or rather pesticide, it's all about volume.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot of stuff gets chucked at crops.
Yes.
You know, they talk about coral bleaching on the reefs, but they never seem to mention what gets thrown at the cane and the banana
That
and
washes
the
out into from the
pineapple
rivers.
crops in a place that has really high impact rainfall.
Yes.
No one ever mentions that, you know, and coral's really sensitive to that sort of thing, but it's global warming.
All the water that comes down onto the land ends up flowing into the ocean.
Yeah, it's all drained. You know, a place like Tully or somewhere like that where they have huge rainfall, of course it's going to end up ultimately, I mean, even sunscreen apparently is one of the biggest things that knocks around coral. So
Yes, and birth control pills and
well, maybe
antidepressants.
Well,
Fish on Prozac.
I'm not going to go there, but you know, like broad-scale agriculture uses broad-scale herbicides, pre-emergent herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, all sorts of asides.
Yes. Okay, so how about your epiphany that you had yesterday?
That's a bit esoteric.
That's good. It's time for that. Welcome to part 2.
It depends on who's listening to this bit.
Well, I am.
Well, you asked me about plants and consciousness and how they relate and all of those things. And yeah, I do have epiphanies, and I do have the ability to sort of be aware of more subtle things in our environment over and above what you see with your eyes.
Well, did I hear you say that the pixies shared this with you?
That's one way of putting it.
The thought divas of the plants.
Well, an intuitive response, let's say, and where each plant species has an attendant subtle element that grows with it. So the plant itself doesn't have the nervous system to carry consciousness, but the attendant elemental aspect, the individual elemental aspect does.
Would this be for that species of plant, but not the individual?
No, for the species.
So it's like a field.
It's
of
like
consciousness field.
Like each plant species has its own attendant, is a way of putting it.
Yes.
Associate that, a bit like a taxi driver.
Would the people at Findhorn use that term?
I don't know what they would have used. That's my term, and that's my.
But it's
cognition.
really cool. So
it's what I don't know. Maybe they did, and I don't think they'd argue with me.
Yeah.
But that's it's not a thing that science is aware of because it's too subtle. So it has to be in the realm of consciousness that cognition's met.
Is the attendant being or entity capable of relating with people or communicating and in both ways?
Yeah.
You to it and it to you.
Yeah. And that's how the shamans and the ancient peoples who weren't complicated, like modern society's complicated, were able to understand what this particular plant can do and what this particular plant can't do. So there's a value of trial and error in there as well. But over and above that, there's a subtle understanding, cognition of what the plant is about. So it's not actually coming from the plant per se, it's coming from the attendant.
Yes. It's like the spirit of the species.
It's like,
the archetype.
It's like an archetype, but it's more. Yeah,
it's an emergent property.
You could say that, but it's more of a. I'm trying to find the words to describe it.
Well, that's all right. But would you say that a significant part of shamanism is befriending these attendants?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's.
We're asking for their help and their guidance.
Yeah. Because they're points of intelligence. They're individual points of intelligence that relate to each specific species, and then the species will relate to each other up to a point. But it's not a great complex intelligence. But nonetheless,
do the attendants know each other?
Yeah, it's a community.
Well, have you ever made a conscious effort to connect with the attendant of any certain species, or a group of attendants of like a garden?
Yeah.
The garden divas.
Yeah.
Do you address them?
Yeah.
Do they have names? other than like that particular plant, like apple diva?
Well, the apple's the name we've assigned to things.
Yes, but they might have their own names.
They have their own awareness of what they're dealing with. So, yeah.
To learn that, however it might be expressed, would be very, very interesting. It might be a feeling.
It's all at a feeling level. You know, where this knowledge comes from is at a feeling level, and most people are so caught up with thinking and busy minds that they don't address the level of feeling. Women have a finer nervous system than men, and they tend to be more in tune with intuition, but even then you need to go beyond that to a very subtle level of feeling, and that's where this information's shared. But it's not something you can prove, it's not something you can measure, and it's almost in the realm of you're a wacko.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
So you said, speaking of your epiphany, you said that it's like we are the nervous system of the plant kingdom. Is that what you were saying?
No, the attendants are.
Okay.
So the plant is just like a vehicle that we're calling the attendants use.
Yes.
So it's like the attendants lies the taxi driver, the plant's the taxi.
Well, now let me ask you this. Is there a hierarchy of causality? Is the attendant... I mean, this is the projection of a certain way that we think, you know, because we in other words, what I'm saying is, are they of equal significance in terms of the...
Yeah, you don't have the politics and you don't have the politics and the ego aspect that humans might have.
Yes,
no.
but what I was getting at is something like we were talking about matter versus consciousness. And I think we both agreed that consciousness came first. Consciousness
matter
creates
is consciousness.
You reckon it's
there is only one thing, consciousness. It just breaks itself up into things that appear to be solid.
So you think that everything we think as a material object is just condensed thought?
It's a projection, almost like a hologram.
What if it is? But you're still going to duck if somebody throws a rock at you.
Yeah, of course you are. And you still do your shoelaces up or you'll fall over, and you still blow your nose. It doesn't mean it's not magic.
It's a believable hologram.
It's a very believable hologram. You know, the whole world functions on believing that it's solid and real.
How could it not be? Exactly.
But ask a quantum physicist if that tomato really is what it appears on the outside.
And he'll say, well, yes, I'll show you some equations that express
No,
that.
you can do all that, but I mean, like I said to you before, that you think a leaf is solid. Well, it's not. If you dive into the fabric of a leaf, there's more airspace inside a leaf than solid. But you look at a leaf and think, oh no, it's a solid thing. And you look at the green and think, oh, it's a pigment. Well, it's not a pigment. It's a whole heap of little individual things spinning around, driving around in the liquids in the leaf.
Well, guess what? I just had a little epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, when you go down to your new property, you're going to build a little kind of a shed that's going to be your new art studio, so you can sit there and paint.
Yeah.
And your first big painting can be a large canvas of every kind of leaf that you can think of.
No, I don't think so.
You know what I thought of doing? Well, there's like 150 kinds of bamboo. My friends have 75 of them on their property up in New South Wales, and I was going to get a little frond of each one and use it as a little template to make a painting that showed all, because they're all similar but different. Very interesting. Well, look, let me ask you the one final sort of the big kind of metaphysical question, and I wasn't really completely asking it as a joke, but with a sense of humor. But I asked you last night and then again today, if Jesus were a plant, what kinds of plants might help to fill the shoes of that kind of role? And it's meant to stimulate creative, imaginary thinking, but I went like, well, could he be part acacia for
the Amazon
DMT?
rainforest?
Yes. Well, there you go.
Well, there you go.
That's good.
Because that level of consciousness couldn't be confined in one little tomato. It would have to be quite big. Whether it was Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad or any great Rishi, Patanjali, Shankara, whoever it is, that would probably, account for the same comment. You couldn't contain that. Well, you could, but wouldn't really project what they are able to project.
Yes.
So you wouldn't pull it down to that. No offense to the plant world.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't know. Said a fair bit, I suppose. Said a little bit of a lot of stuff. Love plants, respect plants, because without them you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have soil, you wouldn't have air to breathe, you wouldn't have anything to eat, you wouldn't be able to build your house out of bits of stick, you wouldn't be able to do anything really. So
well, now here's one for
plants really are the essence of life on this particular lump of rock.
Could you say that there's certain kind of forests, or that they say it's actually one organism because it's all, the root system is all connected, or something that goes like that?
Well, not a forest. Forest is still made up of individual different species, unless it's a monoculture. If it's a monoculture, it is one thing you're looking at. It's like a school of fish. If you see 1,000 fish all swimming in unison, or birds all swimming in unison, you're basically looking at the one individual. A bit like the forgotten what they're called. The little green bits in a leaf that spin around. They're all the
chloroplast.
Chloroplast, that's it, yep, chloroplasts. They're like chloroplasts in a leaf. You can classify them as one thing.
Yeah.
Because they're all pretty much...
Well, there'd be an attendant of the chloroplasts.
No, it's the whole species of plant, and it just includes all those out. It's like a mirror of the plant, but it's the nervous system of the plant.
Okay.
It's I guess it's like we have an auric body, a subtle body. The plant has a subtle body as well, but it's intelligent. It's separate to the plant, but it's a part of the plant. Like the plant itself doesn't have that within it, but it has an attending consciousness that's intelligent, that relates to other plants. It's a simple intelligence, but it's intelligent nonetheless. But it's the sort of intelligence that can make decisions and allow the plant to look like a wasp and smell like a female wasp, or like a little orchid in the Amazon that has such a specific relationship with a particular species of bee that without that bee, that orchid can't reproduce. So where at a certain time when the orchid's ready to pollinate another flower, it produces a little bag of pollen called pollinia with a glue on it. It attracts the particular bee. The bee goes in. It has a trigger that actually traps the bee for however 20, 30 seconds or whatever for the glue to set.
Really?
And then it lets it go.
For real?
Yep. And, that's not some random evolutionary quirk. That's far too complex to be random.
Yes.
So there's intelligence that's guiding that.
Yes.
And you'd say, why? Well, then why is a rose red and why is a tomato tasty? It's just, the why isn't an issue. It just is.
Exactly. Well, look, I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree.
There you go.
And Rick, I can't thank you enough for all your help and for sharing all this really wonderful information. And we'll pick back up on and get up later on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.